The moment you finally stop explaining yourself is the day the atmosphere in the room shifts. It's the day you stop being a guest in your own life and start becoming the most powerful presence in any space you occupy. This power doesn't come from being the loudest voice or having the coldest heart. It isn't about winning an argument or making someone else feel small. True power arrives the second you stop giving your energy away for free. For years, you have been leaking power through every sentence you use to justify your existence. You've been handing over the keys to your emotional state to anyone who questioned you. And today, that transaction ends. Think about the sheer amount of time you have spent shrinking yourself down into bite-sized, digestible sentences just so other people wouldn't feel uncomfortable with your depth. You have spent a lifetime over-justifying your heart, your intentions, and your very nature to people who weren't even truly listening. They were just waiting for you to finish talking so they could tell you why you were wrong. You've been performing a one-person show for an audience that never bought a ticket and doesn't appreciate the art. When you stop explaining, you aren't just going quiet. You are reclaiming the massive amount of energy it takes to manage other people's perceptions of you. What nobody tells empaths, the ones who feel every vibration in a room and notice every micro-expression, is that your greatest transformation doesn't come from feeling more. You already feel more than most people will in a lifetime. Your evolution comes from the moment you choose to speak less. For an empath, silence isn't a lack of communication. It's the ultimate form of boundary setting. Your sensitivity has been treated like a wound for so long, something you had to apologize for, something that made you too much or too sensitive. But the truth is, that sensitivity is a high-grade weapon of intuition and influence. However, a weapon is useless if you're using it to beg for permission to exist. If you have ever lain awake at 3 a.m., replaying a 5-minute conversation for 5 hours, this is your wake-up call. You were replaying it because you felt like you failed to make them understand. You were trying to find the perfect combination of words that would finally act as a magic key to unlock their empathy. You were defending your kindness as if it were a crime. You were defending your heart as if it were a weakness. But you have to realize that if someone needs a 10-paragraph explanation to see your value, they aren't looking for the truth. They're looking for a reason to keep you in a defensive position. The cold shock is the realization that you owe no one a map to your soul. When you stop the explaining, you stop the performance. You stop the people-pleasing. You stop the desperate, please see me energy that people subconsciously use to manipulate you. By stepping into a place of quiet, grounded certainty, you force the world to meet you on your terms. You aren't being cold, you are becoming solid. You are finally deciding that your internal peace is more important than someone else's temporary misunderstanding of you. This is where your new life begins, not with a shout, but with a powerful, final silence. There is a very specific, heavy kind of soul drain that only an empath truly understands. It isn't the kind of tiredness that follows a long day of physical labor, nor is it the simple fatigue of a busy schedule. This is a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from the relentless, compulsive, and ultimately fruitless act of explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You find yourself constantly trying to justify your silence when you're overwhelmed, explaining your tears when you're hurt, and defending your boundaries as if they were personal attacks against others. You are trapped in a loop of trying to prove that your feelings are valid, your intentions are pure, and your heart is in the right place. The tragedy of the empath is the persistent, haunting belief that if you could just find the perfect combination of words, the right tone of voice, or the exact right moment to speak, the other person would finally have a breakthrough. You think, if I just explain it one more way, they'll finally get it. You believe that clarity is the solution to your conflict, so you pour your entire essence into being understood. You write the long paragraphs, you have the 3-hour talks, and you revisit the same emotional territory over and over again. But you have to look at the cost of that belief. It is costing you your sleep, your mental health, and, most dangerously, your self-respect. Every time you over-explain to someone who doesn't value your perspective, you are essentially telling yourself that your reality isn't real until they agree with it. You have become a world-class defense attorney for your own soul, but you are presenting your case to a jury that is completely rigged against you. This is the part that is hard to hear. The people you are trying so hard to reach often don't actually want clarity. They don't want to see your heart or understand your pain. What they want is control. They want to keep you in a state of perpetual defense because as long as you are busy explaining yourself, you are not busy standing in your power. By forcing you to justify your boundaries, they are effectively making you ask for permission to have them. They use your desire for harmony against you, knowing that you will exhaust yourself trying to fix a connection that they are perfectly happy to leave broken. Every long, carefully crafted text message you send in the middle of the night, the ones where you pour out your soul and double-check every word for tone, is just you handing over the keys to your internal kingdom. When you send those walls of text, you are signaling to the other person that they are the judge and you are the defendant. You are giving them the power to decide if you are right or wrong for how you feel. You are essentially saying, please validate me so I can stop feeling this pain. But when you hand over those keys to someone who lacks the emotional capacity to hold them, they will only use them to lock you in a cycle of frustration. This exhaustion is a signal that you are trying to irrigate a desert with your own blood. You are trying to grow understanding in a place where nothing is allowed to bloom. The jury isn't listening to your evidence. They've already decided the verdict because the verdict isn't about the facts. It's about their own comfort and their own ego. They would rather believe you are crazy, dramatic, or too sensitive than admit they hurt you or that they need to change. Stop trying to win the case. The only way to win in a rigged courtroom is to stand up, walk out the door, and realize that the judge has no actual authority over your life. Your peace begins the moment you stop waiting for their not guilty verdict and start validating yourself. You need to understand that your habit of over-explaining isn't just a quirk of your personality, and it certainly isn't a high-level communication style. In reality, it is a deeply rooted anxiety response. It is a biological survival mechanism that your body uses when it feels unsafe. For many empaths, this is a trauma reflex born in a childhood where your natural emotions were treated as too much, incorrect, or inconvenient. If you grew up in an environment where you had to justify your tears just to avoid being punished, or where you had to explain your joy just to keep someone else from dampening it, your brain learned a dangerous lesson. It learned that your internal reality isn't valid until someone else signs off on it. Now, as an adult, you aren't actually sharing information when you over-explain. You are desperately seeking external validation to calm a massive internal storm of not being enough. The science behind why you feel this way is fascinating and incredibly validating. Research shows that approximately 20% of the population is born with a nervous system that is literally wired differently. You have more active mirror neurons than the average person. These are the brain cells responsible for empathy and understanding the intentions of others. While most people walk into a room and see a group of friends, you walk into a room and subconsciously download the entire emotional atmosphere. You feel the hidden tension between the couple in the corner. You sense the masked insecurity of the person laughing too loud. Your nervous system was built to absorb the entire room, but the problem is that you were likely never taught how to filter that data. Because you feel everything at such a high intensity, you mistakenly assume that you must explain every single feeling to others just to make the environment feel safe and predictable again. However, there is a harsh reality in the social and emotional economy of human relationships. The person who feels the need to justify themselves is almost always perceived as the person with the least power. Every time you launch into a long explanation of why you made a certain choice or why a comment hurt your feelings, you are signaling to the other person's lizard brain that you are beneath them. You are communicating that your position is weak and requires a defense. In the invisible hierarchy of human connection, the person who can stand in their truth without saying a word radiates a quiet, unshakable authority. When you over-explain, you are essentially begging the other person to agree that you are rational, which gives them the ultimate power to tell you that you aren't. True emotional intelligence is the most misunderstood concept in the world of empaths. Most people think it means being the best at expressing every nuance of your heart, but that's actually a recipe for burnout. Real emotional intelligence is not about expressing everything you feel. It is about regulated internal authority. This means having the capacity to feel a massive wave of emotion, to acknowledge its depth, and to realize that you are the only person who needs to validate it. You become the primary court of judgment for your own life. When you operate from this place, you realize that your feelings are facts in your own body, and facts don't need a 3-page essay to be true. You move from being a responder who reacts to everyone else's discomfort to being a regulated authority who decides exactly how much of your inner world is available for public consumption. This isn't about closing yourself off. It's about finally learning that you are the only one who needs to give yourself permission to feel. When you finally decide to stop explaining yourself, I want you to be prepared for a reality that no one usually mentions. It won't feel like a triumphant movie victory right away. You won't walk away in slow motion with an explosion of confidence behind you. In fact, for many empaths, the first thing you will feel is a heavy, confusing sense of grief. It feels lonely. It feels like standing in a room that has suddenly gone quiet, and that silence can be terrifying. This is because you aren't just changing a communication style, you are breaking a lifelong survival habit. For years, your explaining was the bridge you built to try and keep people close, to keep the peace, and to keep yourself safe. When you stop building that bridge, you realize just how much of your identity was tied up in being the understandable one. It's okay to mourn the version of you that tried so hard, but you must realize that the bridge was only ever running in one direction. The loneliest part of this shift is the realization that many of the people in your life were only there for the performance. They liked the version of you that provided constant clarity and emotional labor. But look at the people who command the deepest, most effortless respect in this world. Think of the individuals whose presence feels like solid granite. They don't send 5-paragraph texts to justify their weekend plans. They don't stay up until 2 a.m. crafting the perfect response to a passive-aggressive comment. They don't do these things because they have developed something you are just now discovering, the power of resonant silence. This isn't the silence of someone who is shutting down or being cold. It is the silence of someone who is so certain of their own truth that they no longer feel the need to audit it with a committee. Their silence speaks louder than your best arguments ever did, because it signals that their peace is not up for negotiation. These high-status, emotionally intelligent people haven't built walls, they built gates. This is a crucial distinction. A wall is a brittle, defensive structure meant to keep everyone out because you're afraid of being hurt. A gate, however, is a functional boundary that you control. You hold the key. You decide who has earned the right to see the inner workings of your mind. You decide who is worthy of a deep explanation and who only deserves a polite no. When you stop performing for an audience that doesn't even deserve a front row seat to your life, a miraculous thing happens to your nervous system. Your anxiety begins to drop. The frantic noise in your head, the one constantly scanning for how to make things okay for everyone else, finally starts to fade. You are no longer responsible for managing the misunderstandings of people who choose not to see you. Think of your emotional energy like water. Up until now, you have been operating like a fire hydrant. Every time a tiny spark of conflict or misunderstanding appeared, you opened the valves and flooded the entire street. You were trying to water a single flower with a high-pressure hose, and all you did was wash away the soil and leave yourself empty. You were flooding the room with your explanations, hoping that the sheer volume of your words would fix the problem. But when you move into resonant silence, you stop being a fire hydrant and you start being a reservoir. A reservoir is deep, calm, and contained. It holds a massive amount of power and life, but it doesn't go chasing after people. It stays centered. It is a quiet, vast resource that doesn't need to explain its depth to be felt. When you become the reservoir, you realize that your silence isn't a void, it's a presence. It's the sound of a person who finally trusts themselves more than they fear the opinions of others. To truly understand this power, you have to picture the person in your life who acts as your ultimate emotional trigger. We all have one. This is the person who seems to have a black belt in misinterpreting your heart. When you are overwhelmed and need a moment of quiet to regulate your nervous system, they label your silence as the silent treatment or a calculated punishment. When you finally gather the courage to tell them that something they said actually hurt you, they roll their eyes and dismiss it as unnecessary drama, or tell you that you're being too sensitive. In the past, this was the moment your clarification campaign would kick into high gear. You would feel that frantic, desperate itch in your chest to set the record straight. You would spend hours, maybe even days, drafting the perfect explanation, citing examples of your past kindness, and trying to prove that you aren't the villain they are making you out to be. You were essentially begging for a seat at a table where you were already being served a dish of disrespect. But the new you operates from a place of radical, grounded stillness. When that person throws a false narrative at you, something different happens. You still feel the heat of the injustice. You still feel the sting of being misrepresented, because you're human and you're an empath, and your nervous system is wired to notice the gap between your truth and their lie. But instead of letting that sting drive you into a defensive frenzy, you simply acknowledge it. You say to yourself, I feel hurt because I am being misrepresented, and that makes sense. And then you do the most powerful thing a human being can do. You do absolutely nothing. You don't send the text. You don't jump into the argument. You don't try to correct their distorted version of you. You realize that their quote-unquote misunderstanding isn't a puzzle for you to solve. It is a tool they are using to keep you off balance. If they wanted to understand you, they would have asked a question. Since they made an accusation instead, your explanation is just fuel for their fire. Instead of pouring your precious emotional energy into the quote-unquote black hole of their opinion, you take that energy and you turn it inward. You process the emotion in a space that is actually safe. You write it down in a journal where the pages don't argue back. You talk it through with a trusted friend who has the emotional capacity to actually hold your heart without judging it. You allow the quote-unquote sting to move through your body and out the other side without attaching a 3-page defense to it. By refusing to engage with the false narrative, you are making a profound statement. Your opinion of me is not my responsibility. You are finally accepting the reality that some people would rather quote-unquote win a conflict than have a healthy relationship with you. When you stop trying to convince them of your goodness, you stop giving them the power to make you feel bad. You have to start treating your emotional energy like a finite, non-renewable resource, because that is exactly what it is. Every minute you spend trying to explain your boundaries to an emotionally unavailable person is a minute you aren't spending on your own dreams, your own health, or your own happiness. Think of all the businesses that weren't started, the books that weren't written, and the gym sessions that were skipped because you were too emotionally exhausted from a 3-day argument with someone who doesn't even like themselves. When you stop pouring your water into cracked pots that can't hold it, you finally have a full reservoir to pour into your own life. You start to see that you have enough energy to build a career, to cultivate hobbies that actually make you feel alive, and to invest in people who see you clearly the first time. The power isn't in winning the argument. The power is in realizing the argument wasn't worth your time in the first place. This is where you stop being a manager of other people's perceptions and start being the architect of your own future. Choosing silence is not an act of coldness, and it certainly isn't a sign that you've stopped caring. In fact, it is the ultimate mark of emotional maturity. It is the moment you finally understand the profound, life-altering difference between intimacy and self-abandonment. Intimacy is the beautiful, sacred process of sharing your inner world, your fears, and your dreams with people who have earned the right to hear them. People who show up with consistency, empathy, and respect. Self-abandonment, on the other hand, is what happens when you frantically explain your soul to people who have repeatedly shown you they don't value it. When you over-explain to the indifferent, you are essentially deserting yourself to go and beg for a stranger's approval. The opening happens when you stop that desertion and decide to finally stay on your own side. You have to realize that the world desperately needs your empathy, your depth, and your unique way of seeing the unseen in every room. We are living in a time that is starving for genuine connection and emotional intelligence. But the world cannot have the best version of you if you are perpetually exhausted. You cannot offer your light to the people who truly need it if you are spending all your fuel trying to light a fire in someone who prefers the dark. Think of yourself as a well of deep, clear water, a well that allows itself to be drained by those who are just looking to waste the water will eventually run dry. When that happens, you have nothing left for the people who are actually thirsty, including yourself. By stopping the relentless cycle of explanation, you aren't being selfish. You are being a responsible steward of the gift you were given. You are finally putting a fence around your well so that your resources can accumulate and actually serve a purpose. The day you stop explaining is the day your gift finally comes home. For your entire life, your sensitivity has been pointed outward, like a satellite dish searching for a signal of okayness from everyone else. You've been scanning faces, tones, and texts, trying to find a reason to feel secure. But when you cut the power to that external search, something miraculous happens. The satellite turns inward. The room finally goes quiet. For the first time in years, the static of seeking approval, that constant buzzing background noise of, do they like me? Did I say that right? Do they understand I'm a good person? Simply fades away. In that newfound silence, a new voice begins to emerge. It isn't a loud or demanding voice. It's a calm, steady, and unshakable one. It is the only voice that has ever truly mattered, your own. This is the voice that tells you that you are enough, exactly as you are, without a single footnote or justification. It tells you that your heart is a cathedral, not a courtroom. When you stop explaining, you stop being a defendant in your own life and you start being the resident. You begin to hear your own intuition again. You begin to feel your own desires without filtering them through someone else's possible disappointment. This is where your real life actually begins. You move from a state of performance to a state of presence. You stop trying to convince people to love you, and you start being a person who is easy to love because you finally love and respect yourself. The transition is simple but revolutionary. Stop explaining, start living. Every time you feel that old, anxious urge to defend yourself today, take a breath and realize that you are standing at the threshold of your own power. You don't owe the world a manual on how to treat you. You show the world how to treat you by how much of yourself you refuse to give away for free. The most powerful version of you has been waiting patiently on the other side of your silence. It's time to walk through that door, close it quietly behind you, and finally enjoy the peace of a room where you no longer have to prove you belong.